Okay, and we're live. Welcome to everyone as you're coming in. Thank you for joining me and shortly me and Ramiro. I would like to see who's in here, so I'm checking the chat. Welcome, Avi. Thank you for popping in to see us. I hope you enjoy this. Please drop into the chat where you're listening to us from so that I can say hello to you. And throughout this, you should know that questions are going to be welcome. So the whole point of this session and every session that I've hosted with Ramiro have been to share interesting information and educational advice. So while I'll start out with a caveat that none of this is legal advice, please do chat in, please do ask questions, even if they're personal, if they're only relevant to you or you feel they're only relevant to you, you'd be surprised how many people have exactly the same issues. So don't be shy. And with that, I'll let you know what we're going to be covering today. We're going to be discussing the strategies with which you'll enhance your chances of securing an O1A visa specifically. And we're tailoring this towards founders, not that they're the only people who can apply to this, but we tend to find they're the people who we can help the most often. Ramiro Roballos, he is the founder and CEO of Tukki. He's going to break it down category by category. And yeah, we will stay online afterwards to answer any questions that we don't get to throughout the chat. But first, I will welcome Ramiro to the stage. And well, I'll ask him to introduce himself and tell us what is it Tukki does for immigrants. So you know why I asked him to explain all of this today.
Thanks, Nadine, and thanks everyone for being here. So yeah, essentially, Tukki is a startup that we built last year. It's already time passes. Essentially, to make immigrants' lives better. I've experienced the immigration journey firsthand. I have a ton of friends that have gone through the same. Typically, it's not a pleasant one, and it's pretty stressful, and service is really subpar. So we really built this company to change that and to really, grant a great immigration experience for everyone, just by combining, the traditional lawyer experience and very experienced immigration attorneys, just with more technology and better processes. So we're kind of combining the best of both worlds, and we want to, become the place where people learn more about immigration in easy easy ways for understanding them. Sometimes this is pretty complicated, pretty fast. There's so many, articles, documentation, government, regulations from, 30, 40 years. You read all sorts of like conflicting information. So these sort of series we're doing with Nadine are essentially to, educate a little bit and give you the gist of it. As Nadine said, not legal information, but just general guidance. And then we can, of course, take it offline with our lawyers, right, and take it from there. In particular, today our focus is startup founders, right? So there are many visas, right? There are many visas in which you can apply to the U.S. non-immigrant visas, immigrant visas, green cards, that are immigrant visas, family green cards, family processes, etc. We're today going to really focus on just one. That is the extraordinary talent non-immigrant visa. This the O1 is one of the most popular for entrepreneurs, typically a great fit. And when you read
why it's so good for entrepreneurs, why is it that entrepreneurs tend to be the ones who have this extraordinary ability for the O1A?
Yeah, so entrepreneurs and many others, right? So just to clarify, it's like many others are, but entrepreneurs are one of them. And typically, because as we're going to cover in the next few minutes, there are many categories that entrepreneurs tend to meet, right, for the O1 because of the nature of building a startup yourself. And that's why that's typically a great fit versus other options that maybe the investment visa or other options that, of course, sometimes are. But I'd say that maybe 95% of early stage entrepreneurs I know are on the O1 visa, right? On the O1.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's very, very popular because it doesn't require your company to be really established in the US. There's no requirements whatsoever in terms of like revenue, operations, clients, or anything like that. It's the O1 visa is more focused on the individual, right? Of course, you need to have a petitioning company in the US that a lot of times is the actual startup of which the founder is at least owner partially, right? But yeah, this is mostly focused on the individual, right? And as we're going to see shortly now, there's many categories for which founders are typically a great fit.
Perfect. So I'm going to clarify and make sure that I understood that, because you explained it very quickly because it's all like, a second language to you, whereas for the rest of us, this is Chinese. So the O1A visa doesn't require you to be established as a company in the US. It's focused on the individual, you said. Did I get that right?
So you do need a company that is petitioning you, or there's another option with agents. Like, let's not get into that. It's a little different, but in general, yes, you will need a US organization, company, asking for you. But
Mm.
the requirements for that company are really, really, thin. So there's no requirement of, having employees or having certain revenue or having certain threshold in whatever metrics, right? It's just like there needs to be a company, and there needs to be a company where there's a real employer-employee relationship, right? Meaning, if you are the owner of 100% of that company, right, like that looks very much like a self-petition, right? Because it's there's not a bona fide relationship, right? There's no a third party, it's just yourself, right? Whereas if, for example, you have 30% of the company, right, and you don't have the majority, and there's a board of directors that could potentially fire or hire you, right? There is a real connection between you and the company, where the company is the employer and it's a different thing from you and you're the employee, right? Beyond that, like, there's not much more required from that versus other visas such as L1, where the focus is mostly there, right? Like, how many employees are going to be managing, what's the size of the company, where do you need a manager coming to the US, right? The L1A is like international managers or executives. So, but there the stress is on the company, right? So there it matters how much revenue, how much operations, how much employees, how many employees. On the O1, not really. The focus is on you, right? Like, are you extraordinary, as USCIS understands it? And if you are, then sure, you need to check the boxes on in terms of petitioner, but not much more than that.
Perfect. We're going to get more into this word that he mentioned, which is USCIS. And we're going to be talking, as I said, I'll reiterate this today, that we're going to be focusing on the O1A visa. But Ramiro's also mentioned the L1. There's several of them, and they've all got these codes that are like a letter and a number, and then another letter, usually, just to make them really difficult to memorize, essentially. I think that's the whole logic behind this, is how difficult can we make this for people? Hence why Tukki exists. So I'll let you dive into explaining. There's 8 criteria that we're going to go through today, right? So can you start us off with what are those criteria? What do we need to understand if we're a founder and we want to apply to show that we have an extraordinary ability and we deserve a visa in the US and we can contribute? What do we need to know?
Yeah, look, let me flash out for 2 minutes, basically a slide, because there are 8, and I think it's just good for us to be able to see it, right?
Yeah.
You can see my screen, right?
We are watching.
Okay, awesome. So the 8 criteria basically are, the ones you see here. I'm going to go very briefly and quickly over these, and then we can continue talking about them in detail. So, and just as a clarification, you don't need to meet 8 of them. You need to meet 3, at least 3.
Okay.
But then your entire case, when looked at someone from the government, right? Like, the actual language is that you need to be one of those, the few that have risen to the top of your field. So basically, in other words, you're extraordinary. You need at least 3 of them. Ideally, you have a better case. You have more than 3, and you have a compelling case when look at at the entire thing. So awards is basically you have received certain awards. As founder, certain awards to your company, we could potentially tie them to your, to person. Critical employment is that you have been employed, in a critical capacity for organizations with distinguished reputation. Of course, if you are the founder and CEO or founder and CTO, you are, of course, critical. Published materials is basically, publications about you, right? Maybe in major media or in specialized trade publications. Judging is the fact that you have been judging the work of others in your field. Rationale here being, if you are being sought to judge the work of others, peers in your field, you are, recognized as an expert. Membership is that you are part of you have joined a distinguished association where the association, accepts members based on their outstanding achievements, right? Like, if you're just part of something just because having the title of engineer or because you're paying for something is not really going to cut it. High remuneration, that you are compensated, better than the average in your industry. Original contribution, that you basically made some, original, some new thing, novel thing for your field. And finally, scholarly articles, if you have authored either academic papers or comparable things, right? Maybe some white paper or maybe some very specialized content, right? So I went very quickly through them. Let me stop for a minute and let's go one by one, right?
Yeah.
And just, I'm going to go one by one, but I'm also going to give the caveats of like what this means for entrepreneurs and what are the slight adjustments that typical entrepreneurs have that other people don't, right? So, for
And are the
example,
people who we're talking about here, like little on me as a marketer, or do?
like for example, I don't know, that I don't know, you are an expert in your industry, right? And you have a very high position on a company, right? Uh,
Okay.
and you have had, for example, critical roles and a lot of things, but some of them are not. So, for example, let me give you an example. Awards, right?
Mm.
USCIS, that is the agency within the government that adjudicates, one of the agencies, because there are many, but one of the main agencies that work with immigration, adjudicating these visas, right? So awards, there is language in USCIS that venture capital funding can be considered an award,
An
right?
award, right?
So, I mean, not for everyone in the company, but if you are the founder and you're the actual responsible for
Mhm.
getting that funding, right? It's like getting that venture capital funding awarded to your startup is actually awarded to you as a founder,
Yeah,
right? You are the reason. You are the person selling this vision to the VCs. You are the one, having all these conversations, and it's comparable. So we can argue that when your startup received VC funding, you actually got an award for yourself, right? So that's
got
one
it.
of the things that start founders we work with, right? Or we typically go down that route. Critical employment. I mean, describing that you as founder and CEO, or founder and C whatever, right? CTO, CPO, etc., have a critical capacity. It's not that
Yeah,
hard because you're one of the founders. Clearly, you are critical, but the second part of that criteria is showing that your company has a distinguished reputation, right? And early stage startups, sometimes they don't have like large revenues or large customer base, but there's many things you can do, right? You can you can show like distinguished investors backing your startup, some relevant client logos, appearance in media, maybe some competitions or whatever, accelerators, right? Like things that show that, hey, even though your business is early and it's young, it actually is making a dent in the industry and is acquiring recognition uh,
hmm
from multiple people, right? So I think that's the part that typically we help entrepreneurs go for. Publish materials, again, if you're a founder, it's very common to have some media appearances, some media coverage about your funding rounds, about whatever competition, about this appearance or that appearance. So that's
yeah,
typically available. That's something that very recognized experts, right? Maybe you have been working for 10 years at Google, but maybe you don't have, articles about you where you're named there, specifically you, Nadine, for example. But it's just a different type of exposure, right? So that was what I was saying. Like, it doesn't, like, sometimes you might have like an excellent career, but it's not always clear that this is going to apply to you, right? So that's why
got it.
founders have a better fit here.
That
Uh,
makes perfect sense. And you're going to go into the 8 different criteria a little bit more in detail as well, and tell us what to do with them, right? This is the next step, right? Because beyond saying, okay, we've got 3 of these criteria, I can say I've got awards, I've got an investment, I've got these things. You're going to tell us what we can do with this, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, like the thing is, like, make sure you have at least 3, right? Like, once you
Okay.
have 3, then you might have a case, right? And of
Okay.
course, then we have actually a visa. We have like all sorts of resources for you to check online on our website. That you can check if you qualify or not. We can make an assessment in detail, and then at some point, it's always good to check with one of our lawyers, right? Because these things are tricky. Some things might qualify, some things might not. Sometimes people
Okay.
reach out and say like, okay, how many published materials do I have? Like, how many articles? Like, it's not a clear cut answer. Sometimes one. Like, we have a client where her, one of the people, writing her expert letters, like he appeared on the, the cover letter of the cover of Forbes, right? So, hey, probably that one it's
Just
enough.
one letter is enough. Okay.
One published material, you're on the cover
Right.
of Forbes, like sure, like that's
Right.
pretty impressive. If on the other hand you have like very small, articles on here and there, like not that many relevant, maybe you need a lot, right? So it's not that obvious, right? But I'm just saying that typical founders I've seen, VC funding, right? Okay, check critical employment, check if your startup has a little bit of traction, publish material, check, and also when you receive VC investment, typically you at least have um, you at least have some coverage on that. In terms of startup world, judging, this is very common on pitch nights, right? For us, it's like maybe for academics, judging is more around peer reviews, right? So someone
Right.
writes up, a academic paper, and then you are being the peer reviewer, and that's very common, and that's what USCIS also talks about. But in our world, right, typically we are not peer reviewers. Like most entrepreneurs are not coming from academia, although some are. And then being part of a pitch night or a hackathon or something that it was relevant and you were invited, like that's typically another one that we see a lot with the entrepreneurs. With memberships, accelerators are a great fit for entrepreneurs, right? Like typically you're not going to be part of an industry membership, at least not most entrepreneurs I know, but a lot of them have gone through some accelerator, YC, Techstars, or other examples. And the accelerators are typically a very good way of showing this, that they are hard to get into and you are accepted into that. And with high remuneration, we're getting to the end, I promise. With high remuneration, again, founders a lot of times don't pay a lot to themselves because things of the startup, you want to have more runway, and you want
Yeah, of course.
to pay
So
yourself
it'd
a
be
lot.
hard to qualify for that as a startup founder.
Exactly, but equity might count, right? You can use equity for this. So typically what you can argue as an entrepreneur that, hey, startup businesses in general don't pay founders a ton of money, but that compensation is mostly given into equity, right? So if you can value, with a safe note or whatever, like what's the valuation of your startup and what's your percentage, that's a total compensation package. So that's another way of showing that. And finally, when the last two, right, original contributions, probably you're not going to have a patent or you're not going to have like a paper, but arguably if you're building a startup, you should be doing something innovative to your field, right? You should be doing something new, something that is not already out there in certain way of form. And if you're the founder, we can attribute, we can connect like that original contribution, that new thing of your startup with yourself, right? So just by doing the startup, right, like critical employment, original contribution, if you get funding, you already get the awards, and typically comes that with published materials already. With VCs, there's a number to your equity, and then you get higher remuneration. And then finally, scholarly articles is scholarly articles, right? So you either have it or not. Again, it doesn't necessarily need to be like an academic paper, but sometimes you have been, writing about your industry in very specialized trade publications, right? I don't know. Let's say you have a startup on cybersecurity, and you wrote a few pieces on different like well-known cybersecurity, magazines or just I don't know, publications, conferences about that. Like that can also be counted, right?
Okay.
Um, so
Perfect.
so the thing is, okay, maybe you are at a point here where you already have all of them. Maybe you don't, right? So what do you do if you don't? And this is the point, right? Like planning ahead of time. Some of these things take time to build. So I think it's important to understand which one of them could help you, or you could start building them. So, for example, if you're already thinking of raising a round, right? As soon as you raise a round with prominent angel investors or even better VCs and institutional money, you're probably going to get awards and high remuneration, right? And critical employment and original contribution are kind of part of your startup, right? So just by building a startup and raising some money from VCs, you're almost guaranteed to have 4, right?
Okay. Right.
And again, probably 5 because of published materials. Every time you raise a round, there's coverage on that raise. So that's why, and I didn't to your previous question of like, why do entrepreneurs go with this, right? because again, right?
They probably can. They probably apply to it, or what's the word? They're probably good candidates.
Yeah, they're a good fit, right? And again, of course, if you're just starting with your startup, you incorporated your company yesterday, you don't have any funding, you don't have any traction, you don't have anything. Well, probably, in 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever, 9 months, it's going to be a much more of a possibility to you.
Mhm.
Some other things you can start doing right with time is like, okay, let's find some publications that talk about your industry and try to become a contributor to that, right? Like try to do like write something interesting that is specialized for experts in your field, so you can share. It's also good for your startup and to position yourself as a thought leader, but you're also helping with this criteria. If you can participate or if you get invited, a lot of times entrepreneurs get invited to be a judge in a pitch competition, a panel, a conference. They say no because they're so busy, right? So okay, maybe next time say yes, right, and participate as a judge of those
Yeah.
things. um so this visa is a lot. It's not just about being extraordinary, but showing that you're extraordinary, right? So if you look at these things, right, like being featured in media, getting awards, being accepted to memberships, writing articles, right? It's just about what's the impact you are making to your field,
Mm.
not just like yourself being a very successful businessman, right, and just earning a ton of money. It's just like what's the impact beyond making money that you're doing to your field.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, okay, so we may not be able to, we may not have 3 of these 8 or 4 or 5 of these 8 criteria, but we could start working towards them. Maybe we're already getting the offers to do these things. Maybe we've been lagging and thinking, oh, I don't need press coverage. But actually, that press coverage, if you've got an article in TechCrunch, that might blow up and give you more validity to apply for this visa. You, as a founder yourself, Ramiro, did you have to work towards any of these? Were you one of the lucky ones that just already had the 3 criteria to go for this, or did you choose a different route?
No, I mean, I was on a different route. Like I came through McKinsey. Back then I was working for McKinsey Buenos Aires. I transferred to McKinsey, Miami, and I went through the L1 route, right? But today with Tukki, I do actually, have a lot of these criteria, right? Basically based on what I said, right? So
You would
again,
qualify.
yeah, and also like the other thing USCIS, can bring trouble with them is like, hey, if 70% of your evidence appeared like in the last month, right? So okay, 8 articles about you, 2 pitch competitions, 3 articles you wrote.
Fish.
Like, hey, this is a little fishy, So
Yeah.
also like, like you want to see that it's bona fide and it's real, right? So
Yeah.
also like, just planning ahead, trying to do these things ahead of time. And look, there's a lot of people that come to us, and our honest answer is like, look, we don't think you're ready. To work on these things, advance these categories. Let's talk again in 6, 9 months, right? And I think you'll have a much better chance there. And sometimes that's the right thing to do, right? It's just wait and work towards building this, right? In the US, in particular, the Indian population are super experts of this because unfortunately they have such a long backlog in comparison to the rest of the world, right? So, for example, for other categories, not for visas, but for green cards, right? That there is also like an extraordinary ability green card, the EB1A. So for the rest of the green cards, the EB2, the EB3, an Indian-born citizen needs to wait like 12 years, right, to get their green card, which is completely crazy.
Right.
So even though they have offers all the time to get those green cards, like that's not really useful.
Wait. So is there like a quota per country?
Yeah, there's a quota for countries.
So no matter how big the population is, it's not proportional to the
No,
size of the.
exactly. And
Wow.
that's the problem. And that's the problem. So rest of the world typically have, all of us, we have like the same waiting times, but India, China, Philippines, Mexico, they have different timings, and India is the worst of them all. So typically you always see, every time I talk with an Indian prospect or client or just friend, they know a ton about these things, right? Because they are like, hey, I don't want to wait 12 years. I want to go for EB1A, that is kind of the big brother, right, of O1A, because it's kind of the extraordinary ability, but in green cards. And they are working, right? They work like 1, 2, 3 years just to build their profile and to do all these things, right? To be able to qualify for that, because even if you take 2 years to build your profile and then you apply, it's going to be like 4 or 5 years versus the 12, right? For the next better alternative. So it's just, sometimes you just don't qualify and you do. But again, if you're a startup founder and your startup has some traction, more likely than not, you might be a good fit, right? We should
Yeah.
evaluate each case by case, right? But by the way, we have if you go to our website, there's a visa match, right? That we have, where you can, there's certain questions there, and you can just check it out, and we can also follow up, checking each one's case. But yeah, sometimes it's a process, and sometimes it requires patience and hard work just to get the application going.
Okay, amazing. So we've talked about what you need to know, essentially what you need to understand, what the USCIS is looking for. What's next? How do you go about? You just take all these bits of paper and into a nice folder and walk into the US embassy and hope that they accept it. What's the next step?
No, I mean, look, that's where we get into play, right? Like we help immigrants throughout the entire thing. It's kind of a white glove service, right? Like that's why we do everything, right? Like we bring the technology, we bring the lawyers, we bring the paralegals, so we take care of everything. It is unfortunately a pretty complicated and complex process, long, tedious, with a lot of details. So yeah, I haven't known anyone that has gone directly to the embassy with these things. Like some people, when they want to get maybe a family green card or a tourist visa, like sure, if you
Okay.
want to spend some time, like you can do it by yourself, no problem.
Yeah.
With these sort of petitions, I think it's way more complicated. There's a ton of legal argument. There's a ton of bits and nuances about doing this. So yeah, typically, people either go to a traditional lawyer, right, a law firm, and they have the good things, the bad things, right, like not really technology oriented and slow and a little cumbersome. But again, right,
Yeah.
there's great lawyers out there, and that's definitely a possibility. And then there's companies such as us, right, that we combine that also with technology and a better experience, and a faster turnaround. But yeah, I mean, certainly do reach out if you have any questions. We always talk with people, and even if we know that that person is not ready today, we are always just having friendly chats about their case and what they could do in their particular case to build this in the future to have a better petition.
So your day job is giving out a lot of free advice, not
It
just
is.
via webinars like this. It's by talking to people about their specific cases.
It is. And look, when we started Tukki, right, we said we wanted to do immigration but simple.
Yeah.
And we mean it, right? And sometimes that means through clients, sometimes that means through webinars, sometimes that means through the free tools we're building on our website, and other things, right? We just want to make this process better. We want to change the way US immigration happens. And we just want to change the industry, right? It's not just like having a few clients. Like we really want to change the way this works.
I want to share something that I've been checking my DMs as we go through this, because there are people that are watching us, but they're not chatting in or they're not commenting. So I just want to say that somebody, I will leave them anonymous, told me, I knew getting an American visa is difficult, but I had no idea how involved it is. So thank goodness what we're doing, you and I at Tukki, what we're doing and what Tukki's doing is making this more navigable. So I just thought I'd share that very kind compliment, and thank you to people who are messaging us directly. If you want to chat in, I said this at the very beginning, but if you missed it, we are willing to answer questions here. If you want sort of free advice, take it, because Ramiro he does this all day, every day. He will likely know how to answer your question, at least give you some direction before you talk to a lawyer, for example. That's not to say that you shouldn't talk to a lawyer, but take advantage. So drop it in the chat, DM us, let us know. We can keep you anonymous as well if you want to ask something specific. To that note, I do have a question that somebody dropped in anonymously as well, but this one's not sensitive. I just won't name them because they did send me in a DM. What kind of startup counts as a critical contribution? So critical contribution is one of those 8 criteria, right?
Yeah, original contribution. Yeah. So any, to be honest, like where
Really?
if what you're doing is novel in some way, and again, if you are building a startup, you should, I mean, in theory, you're doing something different from the next guy, right? Because that's why you're building a startup, because you're not just copying what everyone else is doing, but you have an original point of view, right? So honestly, like any startup that is doing something novel or innovative, right? That is contributing to the field, and we could argue that, hey, this, even if it's like, hey, in Europe, guys are already doing this thing with payments, and in Latin America, this was like unheard of, and we brought this technology and we applied it in Latin America. So even though like maybe globally it's not a new thing, but it is in Latin America, and it's making an important impact, and it's original in some way in your geography, that already counts, right? So I think this is also a matter of getting creative and how you tell the story. Of course, the facts needs to be there, but there's a ton of you can do just explaining in an understandable way, right, to the officer.
Amazing. So I know we're at the half hour and we're going on. For those of you who don't know, we've booked the full hour to talk about this. So if you do have questions, otherwise we will excuse everyone. But I want to summarize what I've been understanding. I think what we're talking about here is presenting a compelling case for your having extraordinary ability as a founder, right? So we're targeting this, we're talking specifically to entrepreneurs. That doesn't mean that other people can't apply to the O1A visa, but who we're specifically talking to here are the kind of the criteria that you're likely to fulfill naturally if you're a founder. So you mentioned already how people can take the first step to knowing if they're eligible, and I gather that's with the visa match tool. Let me bring up that ticker there. So that's the first step, is to go through the visa match tool, which is free. Am I right?
Yes, it's completely free. It's like 4 or 5 minutes. You get an overall understanding. And then if you want to deep dive, you can fill out another questionnaire that we will answer for you, and we will give you feedback on your responses. So it's pretty intuitive.
Perfect. And when he says free, he means like you don't even need to give an email address if you don't want to.
Yeah,
it's literally free. We're not even exchanging for your marketing data unless you want to. So perfect. I actually, it's quite good fun going through that little visa match tool. It's like a little quiz. What kind of pizza are you? So enjoy that. Have a look. Find out which one you'd be eligible for, and of course follow along the process if this is something that you'd be interested in. Ramiro, is there anything that we haven't gone through that you think people need to know about the O1A?
No, this is great, Nadine. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone who came here. Feel free to reach out to us, DMs or whatever. Happy to help you. And we'll see you in the next one.